Hey all, okay. StopKillingGames.com. Saw the website. Watched the guy who's made it, Ross's video. Very passionate person. I think it's misguided. I think it's not a good idea for players. I don't think it's a good idea for devs. I think it's a big lose, and it's framed on an idea of consumer rights that I think is incorrect. That is admittedly not captured in law, because historically products just, it's natural that they wear out over time, but digital products can be different than that. They don't have to wear out over time in some sense. They're digital, they can be replicated much more easily. But I could see there being a lot of problems by asking the government to go in and regulate something like this. I could see it wasting a lot of time and everybody kind of losing as a result. So, all right, that was my stance. I made some analogies. I talked about old trucks and gas and electric cars. I talked about my shirt as a product, and none of these are perfect analogies. They're all analogies. Maybe they're illustrative. Argument from analogy is not great, but all that said, now we're going to dive in and take a look at some people who have talked about this. Some big names. I think this is like a react or something like that. Anyway, it's both a summary of different positions, and so I'm going to be going through super long. Oh my goodness. Good luck to the editors on this one.
And there is an initiative that has been aiming to fight back against a lot of these practices that I think really need some big overhaul. And
it's consumer protection laws. This is effectively what this initiative is. At its very core is consumer rights advocacy. It's not about video games. It's not about Ubisoft. It's not about what's in the terms of service of a video game or not. It's really about consumer rights and people having the ability to choose what's going to happen with their own stuff.
It is actually focused in on video games, because I think if you expanded it, almost every country would reject it almost out of hand. I could be wrong there. I do view this as a consumer rights issue. I just think it's a ridiculous one. I don't think it makes sense. I think it's a gray area because of the nature of digital ownership versus ownership of material physical things that you use in the real physical world. But I do not find the case for this compelling. So let's roll.
Initiative that I think a lot of you are probably very familiar with. It's called Stop Killing Games.
That would be a good
And
thing.
I followed it since its inception. I've talked about it on stream quite a few times. No, this is my first video going over it.
Oh.
And I regret that now because I see it wasn't going as well as I thought it was. Admittedly, I didn't follow...
I think it's gone very well. I'll be real. Like, almost 500,000 signatures is a tremendous success.
But for those that don't know anything about Stop Killing Games, I'm going to let him explain it in his own words. That way you can get an actual, correct, informed explanation of what the initiative is. And the reason I say it like that, kind of like fucking all, pinky out, snooty, is because a lot of people don't even really know what this is because of people like Pirate Software completely misrepresenting.
Jeez. They bringing them up?
Okay, so apparently people have taken sides on this. It seems like Penguin Zero is for it. Asmon seems like he's probably for it, and it sounds like Thor is against it. Okay, so for me, siding with Thor on this one.
Presenting what the initiative was.
As a refresher, Stop Killing Games is a consumer movement to stop publishers from effectively destroying video games they have already sold to customers.
Yeah.
They're not destroying, they're not like coming into your house and like destroying the game. They're turning the servers off. You still have the client copy. The premise is just so, the framing and the premise is so hardcore biased to make you feel like you've been wronged somehow by all of this. And I mean, it's like, oh, Ben, you're in the games industry. You're just some shill or something. Like, okay, you can think that. I don't think this is good for players. I don't think this is good for game devs. I don't think this is good for anybody. I do not want governments going in and trying to figure out how to regulate this stuff. If they need to do that around consumer rights for digital products, please do it in a different context, far away from video games. Really, please just leave it alone. But, I do understand some regulation is important inside of these systems. I just don't think this is a good effort. Yeah.
Was right there. The simplest, bare bones, birthday suit, butt-ass naked explanation for what this is. Stop destroying things.
The initiative for Stop Killing Games is to serve the purpose of stopping companies from killing games.
They're not killing them.
Okay, I can see that. Yeah, that makes sense.
That people have paid money to own.
Look, I say they're not killing them. They're not destroying them. It is fair to say. I shouldn't say they're not killing them. In many ways they are. I've got a server, again, competitor to the MOBA space, shows up, Dawngate. They run it for a while. A lot of people really like it. They realize they're spending way more than they're making on that, and that doesn't seem to be a trajectory that's changing. And they go, we're going to shut down the server. A lot of people have bought products in that game. like cosmetics and whatever else they were selling. And so they decide to turn it off. It's distressing. And in some sense, they do kill the game because now there's no common place for everybody to go to. But of course, they also had to maintain that. And I get it. He's not saying that company has to indefinitely maintain support to the game. It could also just hand it to players, and players could do it on their own. There are problems with that. That is not a trivial. They make it sound as if like that's easy. That's just the simplest thing in the world. It's not. Again, have some engineers come in and tell me like actually it would not be that difficult. It would be super easy. It's like half a day of work for one dude, just or dudette, right? Like we'd be totally fine. This is really really easy for us to just make sure. I don't think that's the case. We're dealing with more than just the client as the thing that ends up in the buyer, the player's hands. It's all the rest of the code stacks that are involved, like wherever they live and whatever they do, whether they work with AWS or they work with servers on Rails or they work like to connect all those things together properly. Like it's very difficult and very complex running a live service product, and I get that they're like, well, what's the minimum you could do? But the problem is then like, well, let's put a bunch of people together and find out what the minimum is and then have them go do that work. And sometimes that minimum might be far more than you want for games that just weren't going to make it. It's okay. Not every game makes it. Not every game makes it. All right. I am more okay with the idea of, hey, can we like capture all that code and store it somewhere so it's not lost to time and there's some historical, I don't know, so like artistic, like museum, the games all end up in here, like the Library of Congress or something. Like, yeah, fine, do something like that. That's not what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
I think that is a very understandable, very reasonable take, very agreeable. Now, on a quick...
And it sounds like that. It sounds so reasonable, sounds so agreeable. It does. It's like, hey, they're killing our games. Why we should stop them from killing our games. They're destroying our games. Oh, we can't play our games. Like, I bought a game and I can't play it now. Products wear out. This is how games wear out.
We jump to a different spot in this video because I think it's important to have this in the beginning because it's something a lot of people have heard that comes from someone that is just wrong about it. It's the pirate software portion. Ross is addressing the video pirate software made many months ago.
I remember watching this.
Ross even says that he didn't plan on doing that because he didn't want to be seen as using this for drama farming because it would start to make the movement look less of like a legitimate initiative and more of just like drama swap content type thing. But he finally starts talking about pirate software here because it's at the end of the life cycle of this initiative, and it's not looking promising, so he's willing to do anything to try and set the record straight and hopefully start getting more momentum back to the movement because the damage pirate software did to it through his video was substantial.
So this video was very polarizing with pirate software's audience, and it was one of the big points where, now people don't like Thor, but back then people were very positive about him, and that video was one of the first points of difference that he had with his audience. You guys remember this?
I understand what's...
It's interesting because I've seen that video thumbnail before, but I never watched it. Wasn't that interesting to me. So now I'm seeing it. Now it's placed in this context of stop killing games. So let's see what Ross says in response to pirate software brought up by Penguin Zero, reacted to by Asmon, and now commented on by me.
Points of difference that he had with his audience. You guys remember this?
I understand what stop killing games is. Here it is in his words.
Okay, that's fine.
So for those who don't understand, the Stop Killing Games initiatives
SKG
is basically we don't want single-player games to have DRM that the developers can turn off and thus render the single-player games inactive anymore. This is what they want to change. They need to be specific that they're talking about single-player games that do not need a server to support them.
No.
And as much as they want it to be about specifically games, where it is a single-player game that has always online functionality, it would impact every live service game that exists. Instead of just targeting single-player, always online games.
No, that's not what it is.
No.
So what's fascinating here is as I watch Thor say this, one, that isn't what the website says. That's that, so maybe he just skimmed it or whatever. But that would be almost a more reasonable thing that might be a little bit simpler. Like, yeah, you'd have it's funny, even though I still kind of hold the stance I do that, like, look, I don't think we should get government regulation involved in this. It's okay that games have a life cycle and that they die. If they were like, hey, look, some of these games, they're totally accessible. It's just there's a DRM and they turned off the thing that allowed, like the internet bits that allow me to successfully confirm that, like, I own a valid copy of the game. And so now I can't do that, and so I can't play the game. If that was it, I'm almost like, yeah, that might... I'd have to talk to engineers before really saying this. I have more confidence in my other stance around engineering than this one. That would feel more reasonable to me than it applying to all multiplayer games. And so it's almost like Thor's giving them the benefit of the doubt that they're not just wee, and actually they are.
Stop Killing Games includes single-player games, but nothing about it is specific to them. He completely made that up, and I have no idea where he got that impression. It's the first line on the website. Stop Killing Games is a consumer movement started to challenge the legality of publishers destroying video games they have sold to customers. But the movement includes all this stuff from earlier, and he was mostly talking about the initiative.
Yes.
He didn't even get the Cliff Notes summary right. Ross.
I think this is fair. Like, this is fair critique. Thor, if again, I don't know what was on the website back then. Assuming it was similar to what's on the website today, that is a misunderstanding of what is there. I do think it's interesting because, like I said, I think he actually gave them more benefit of the doubt. Like, hey, this is what they're asking for, and they should focus there. That might be more successful. I didn't watch Thor's whole video, but the fact that it applies to everything, I think it's a problem. So I guess I'm not on Thor's position because Thor didn't understand the position that he was attacking particularly well. Though I do, if he's the one who thinks this is not a good idea, I'm with him on that. I think this is not a good idea.
Mostly talking about the initiative.
Yes. He didn't even get the Cliff Notes summary right. Ross is correct. This has nothing to do with just single-player only games
It's also
that require an online connection, that when the online connection is severed, you lose access to the game. They need to be more specific in their language about it being single-player, always online connectivity games. When that's just not what it's about. They're not being specific about that because that is not what they're specifically targeting.
I think now we're just beating up the fact that Thor
games that
misunderstood
consumers have already purchased and having no end-of-life plans for games that are being sunset. So, for example, The Crew. The Crew is an example everyone is going to reference and talk about because Ubisoft is still currently in a lawsuit battling against it for what happened with this game.
Yes.
I've yapped about it quite a bit, so I'm not just going to regurgitate that. I'm sure a lot of you already know the story about it. But basically, you buy The Crew, Ubisoft pulls the plug on the servers, you can't play The Crew anymore, now it's just an old wet dream of what it once was. And they are facing a lawsuit, and while this is in the umbrella of Stop Killing Games, it is not the only thing Stop Killing Games is referencing when it comes.
I wouldn't be surprised if any large publisher bureaucracy made an oopsie in terms of we probably shouldn't have turned that off. Players are going to have a more negative response than we would expect. Gosh, I hope that doesn't open us up to this stuff being hyper-regulated again. Bad for players, bad for devs, in my opinion. Open to being wrong, open to hearing the different arguments. I'll keep watching this. I could easily see a game company making a call and having a lot of people really ticked off about this. Not just but there were only 500 people on a server. This isn't worth maintaining anymore. Yeah.
Stop Killing Games, it is not the only thing Stop Killing Games is referencing when it comes to this practice. Pirate Software is so hung up on it being single-player games that people lose access to. When that is a component of it, but not the entire focus.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, right? I mean, obviously, that's it.
Well, the short version is the initiative is about requiring publishers to have end-of-life plans for games they sold to customers in the future. So when they shut them down, customers can continue running them without their support. So that's one thing.
This is something that affects online games and also offline games, or single-player games.
Thor.
It does affect both, and it's probably more work than you think, and there's more risk than you think.
Doesn't understand.
Yeah.
But he also seems to think this is about converting multiplayer games to single-player.
Transitioning an entire multiplayer server-side game into a single-player video game, which means rebalancing the entire experience around single-player, rebuilding everything in the entire game. How are you going to do that with Final Fantasy XIV? You're just going to make all the raids soloable? Imagine the day that World of Warcraft shuts down, and suddenly you have to make it a single-player game for every individual that ever bought the game. That's what they're asking for.
No.
Because they would have to sunset live service games as a single-player experience. The idea that suddenly you need to make...
I don't think that it was ever stated that it needed to be sunset as a single-player experience. I don't think anybody ever said that.
Okay, so what's interesting here is there's two straw men happening. One, I think Thor is, or Pirate Software, I don't know, whatever people call him. I was going to call him Thor. Thor has to some extent strawmanned by misunderstanding or whatever the position of Ross. And now we're attacking the straw man that's attacking the straw man. That's what seems to be going on in this. When I hear Thor talking about this, he's diving, he is taken a step too far based on what's on the website, what Ross has said. I still think what Ross has said is not a good idea, even if it is just, multiplayer game would remain multiplayer, it would still be balanced the same way, it would still be blah, 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 blah. There's a lot of stuff that goes into this. Like I said, let's say I bought Destiny, and I bought a bunch of DLC for Destiny, and Bungie's like, hey, we're turning the servers off for Destiny. Okay, well, which one do I get? Do I get the last one that I bought the DLC all the way for? Or what if I only bought the first Destiny and didn't buy any of the others? Do you need to create a server? Because probably the server code changed along the way. No guarantees there, but highly likely. Code bases are often just going through a lot of iteration and shift and change. Which one do you have to provide to me? Which sliced version do I get? Because my DLC, I purchased that too, and that's a game, right? That's an expansion on the game. how does that work? How do you provide that to me? And so I feel like, again, Thor's like, oh, I need to make every multiplayer game a single-player game, and that would require rebalancing everything. It's ridiculous when the game needs to... And I kind of understand why he's saying that, because that's actually the way you could make it so that anybody who ever purchases the game could continue to play it, because a multiplayer game like Final Fantasy XIV, you'd need a lot of other people. But that's not the argument they're making. They're saying, like, hey, look, if you gave us the ability to create a server for Final Fantasy XIV, and we couldn't find enough people to fill a raid, then we wouldn't be able to do the raids, and we understand that, but at least we'd still be able to play the game and do the content with the number of players we do have. Like, that's what they're arguing. I still think, I'm like, no, bad idea, way more work than any of us probably think. There's this trap when we look at code and servers and how code stacks interact with each other, and is like, this shouldn't be that hard, right? And that happens all the time. It happens in industry. It especially happens outside of industry. It's like, well, why is that so difficult? That shouldn't be that hard. And it is. It's really difficult. It ends up being really difficult, way more than you'd think.
I mean, again, like the publisher maintaining the server seems like that would be like a logical question that you would ask. But making every game single player, I don't really see why you'd need to think about that, considering there's so many locally run servers for all kinds of games, including WoW.
Making the publisher run the server, Asmon just alluded to that is also not, maybe I misunderstood him, that is also not what Ross is suggesting, and I appreciate that about how Ross is like, he's trying to do the minimum. I disagree with it, but he's trying to do the minimum. He's like, hey, if you just make it accessible to people so that they could figure it out, that would be enough. But yeah.
I mean, again, like the publisher maintaining the server seems like that would be like a logical question that you would ask. But making every game single player, I don't really see why you'd need to think about that, considering there's so many locally run servers for all kinds of games, including WoW.
Oh, I think I misunderstood. I think maybe he's talking about, hey, this might have been a more reasonable thing for Thor to assume was going on, not the making everything single player. So maybe Asmon wasn't actually suggesting that the publisher should continue running servers.
Every single live service game, playable single player offline? No, dude.
Correct. No.
It was implied.
This part is more confusing than Finnegan's Wake, because nowhere in anything on Stop Killing Games has this even been like a talking point from anyone besides Pirate Software. I don't know where he pieced this puzzle together. Like I don't get it. Like, if I'm going to try and like really reach here and give like a charitable explanation for this take, maybe he's extrapolating based on the idea that if publishers have to have end-of-life plans for their games, that includes MMOs, where once the game is getting sunset, you're pulling the plug on it.
Yeah, that's what
you need to turn the game over to the community in a playable state, an accessible state, like get the code to them. Thus, it turn it into a single-player experience, so the onus would be on the developers to rebalance their game to be a single-player experience for them. I guess. I have no idea. That still just doesn't make...
I think also another reason why that discussion was happening is that a lot of the conversation around the Stop Killing Games devolved into single player versus multiplayer and who can host servers and how. Like, it wasn't actually in the initiative, but after the initiative was presented, people were talking about those topics.
Any sense, but maybe that's the tree he's barking up with that thought process. I really don't know, because Stop Killing Games at no point ever says any of these multiplayer games need to be converted to single player.
Yeah, nobody.
That really is outlandish. And the more I think about it, like the more nonsensical it becomes, because even in Pirate Software's hypothetical fanfic there, why would the developers need to rebalance the game? They would just turn over the code to the community and just it'd be in that state. They're no longer responsible for balancing the game. That's the whole point. They're not indefinitely supporting it. They would just be responsible of leaving the game in an accessible state to the community while they would shut down the servers on their end.
See, this it just said they would just be responsible, as if it's easy. They just do that, and I that's not totally fair. He's saying, look, they're not asking to do what Thor asked. Or implied or stated, like that we'd have to rebalance everything from multiplayer to single. No, they did not. I just want to be careful here to turn modern multiplayer experiences over to players from a code perspective, so that and the publisher or studio or whatever to like shut down the servers, but now leave it so that players can interact with it. This is not easy. Open to being wrong here. Open to having someone who's like a infra engineer in games come in and tell me like, no, it is actually real easy. We could do it no problem. It would be totally like, all we have to do is hand them some like client APIs and they could figure it out. I think a lot of times they have figured it out for the games where they really wanted to, but for other games they haven't. And often I think that's because there's not that groundswell of support of players that are like, hey, I really want to play this game again. I can go find Star Wars Galaxies player-run servers and play Star Wars Galaxies on them right now. It's a little bit janky, but you can go do it. Why? Because somebody invested the time to go do that. I don't think it was because Sony decided, oh, here's all of our server code. And if they had, I would say that was a foolish decision of them.
The game in an accessible state to the community while they would shut down the servers on their end. Like, they wouldn't need to go back through with a whole development team and like tweak the game
We're
to be
still
single player
attacking the straw
compatible.
man.
It
We're
just
attacking
doesn't make
so
sense.
Thor,
if the
Thor
thing is,
created
if
his
you had
straw
a
man and
community
then he attacked
server,
that.
then the community
Again,
server
maybe
could do that
misunderstanding.
themselves.
Now they're attacking the straw man
Like
of Thor.
you have all kinds of like WoW private servers that have solo raids and all kinds of weird bullshit in them now. So really, it's not something that the developer would really need to do, because as long as people were able to host and run their own servers, this could be done by the community for the community.
I really do not understand that one. But apparently a lot of people latched onto that talking point from Pirate Software as something that Stop Killing Games was asking for and how unreasonable it was. Which, if that's what Stop Killing Games was asking for, it would be unreasonable.
Yeah.
But that's not what it's asking for.
Nowhere in there does it say that it's directly targeting always online single-player games.
Oh, he's so close. He's so close to getting it.
It is vague, and because of that, it will be vague.
He never has that light bulb moment. Well, he is correct in that statement. It's almost as if that's not what the initiative is asking for.
I know this part is...
Yeah, and this was an outcome of the dialogue around it whenever it came out. Because like whenever this video came out, I watched the same video myself, and a lot of people were drawing a distinction between how would this apply to single-player games versus multiplayer games.
So perhaps there is more reason why Thor made this bad assumption based on conversation or dialogue or videos that were released or whatever that led him to this bad assumption. Maybe he didn't just go to the source and read it. Fair enough. Again, we're just smacking like Thor got this wrong, everybody. Okay, cool. Thor got it wrong.
Distinction between how would this apply to single-player games versus multiplayer games. I think that's probably why he was talking about it. But like Ross is right that it applies to all games.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
And it was a dichotomy that was never actually. It was created by the community and not by the actual initiative, if that makes sense. So there was a community conversation about that difference, but the initiative never stated or explained the difference themselves.
And just reinforcing that he doesn't know what the Stop Killing Games movement is about. But I have to just show you this because it is so fascinating, because he himself literally calls out that Stop Killing Games at no point explicitly mentions single-player always online games or anything like that. And for some reason, instead of following the breadcrumbs that would naturally lead him to the conclusion of, oh, maybe I misunderstood. Maybe, because it's absent here, that's not what this is actually about. Instead, he uses it as a criticism against the Stop Killing Games initiative entirely, saying it's just too vague. It's way too vague. The reason it is not explicitly stated there is because that is not what the whole initiative is about. It is not specific.
It's also because an initiative like that that is legally defined by a governing body. Like basically, we're not like this initiative is not legal text. The initiative is something that we are effectively trying to communicate to developers to the government in order for them to translate this initiative into legal text. And so it's really not about the specific wording. It's about what the essence of the wording is and what the goal is what the goal they're trying to achieve is.
And here's again where I come back and say, do we really want people who understand less than both of you and Thor and me about how to make games translating an initiative so that we can regulate this? I don't. And other than that, I think we're just continuing to sort of bang on about like, okay, yeah, Thor got it wrong. But Asmon's here, this is correct, right? The initiative, we're putting out the petition up. We want the governments to figure out how to translate this. And I'm like, I don't want the governments to figure out how to translate this. I don't want them to see this. I don't want them to have to look at it. I do not like this. Stop Killing Games sounds really great. I don't think it's a good idea. Gosh, broken record. I'm the broken record.
And what the goal is what the goal they're trying to achieve is. Like, very clearly, this wasn't written by a lawyer, and it would be debated between probably dozens of lawyers whenever it would be discussed. It's not a law. Yeah, exactly. Like, the reason why it's not hyper-precise is because it's not a law. It's to start the conversation. Yes, clearly.
Targeting that thing that you keep saying that it is. I don't know how that never clicked.
But those were his streams with a smaller audience. What does he say in his big YouTube video with over 1 million views that he had time to research?
If we're trying to kill off the practice of developers putting together a live service game, pitching it as a single-player experience, and then taking away support in the future.
Yeah. Now he's changed it again and is making up how it's about single-player games are advertised. What is he doing?
It needs to be specific about the business practice it's trying to defeat, which is specifically companies that are doing this under the guise of it being a single-player game, but adding online-only functionality that is not necessary and doesn't add any gameplay elements. That's the problem.
No, that's not it at all.
This is a really strong section from Ross here because the clips that you saw moments ago were from his stream. When he took...
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that's a component to it, but it's not the entire thing. I mean, again, like there's there would be like, for example, the way that you would run a single player game would be different than the way that you would run a multiplayer game. Like, for example, like giving players the code for a game would be less necessary and less important if you're just running a game like Dark Souls 1 or Hades or something like that. So like it's just simply one permutation of it. But there's really about probably 4 or 5.
The thing for me that's fascinating about this, Thor should have done his research if he was going to comment on this. Fair enough. He didn't read the thing. Okay, fair enough. I almost feel like Thor's like giving the benefit of the doubt. Well, obviously they're not asking for this ridiculous thing. So like, here's the reasonable interpretation about what they might be asking for, and like it's not clear in their text. It's like, well, it's because that's not what they're asking for. They're actually asking for the other thing. Maybe that's not it, but it almost feels like Thor's like giving the benefit of the doubt and almost being too generous in his like, what are they asking for and what are they focused on? Maybe I don't know. Maybe that's a bad frame. I like I said, I think Ross is a very sincere individual trying to do what he thinks is best. Thor, same thing, trying to misstate and make a mess of this. Like, I don't think he has any reason to misrepresent Stop Killing Games in any way. I could be wrong and he could be paid by somebody to do that, but come on. And nor are these two. I think everybody's like sincere in this, but we are just kind of like smacking each other about misunderstandings right now.
More time to watch it and digest it. He still came back in that video misrepresenting it. Like, it never dawned on him. Like, on stream, he could write it off as like, oh, he didn't grasp it in the moment. Maybe later on he did. Well, then he made the video where he still was talking about things that are just not what Stop Killing Games was about. And this was the one that really blew up and really started to kind of dismantle the Stop Killing Games momentum.
If we don't like the idea of live service games as a whole, I get it. Don't play live service games then. Don't agree to those terms.
No, he's getting a new thing wrong now.
I think that the idea of not agreeing to certain terms is, I don't like that mindset. And the reason why I don't like the mindset is because you could make that argumentation to justify any type of consumer unfriendly practice that's ever existed. The fact is that certain things consumers should not be able to consent to because they're just simply not in the consumer's best interest. And that's why you need government and you need to have regulations. And I know some people act like regulation is some kind of evil fucking, evil spirit word. But the reality is that the computer you're using, the monitor that you're looking at, the phone that you're on, everything that you're using is a product of infinitely many Russian nesting dolls of regulations. Between distribution, merchandising, electricity, wattage, functionality, like everything. So everything like this is regulated. So the entire concept about this is about, regulation being bad, completely untrue. People, again, it's like a fish complaining about water.
I agree with the idea that regulation is everywhere, governments regulate, and that is often in a system without any of that, you end up with some bad actors being able to do some really bad things. And so that regulation ends up being important. I think I would say that regulation is necessary. We'd probably want as little of it as possible. And in this case, I think what's tempting, what he's asking to be regulated is a bad ask. It is not helpful. It is not a win for anybody. It is not a protection for the consumer. It's not a good. I know it can seem like that. Oh, yeah, well, again, I'll get to keep and play my game forever or whatever. And then, like, well, no, you still won't, because things will still become obsolete over time. Companies will still end. I think it'll waste a lot of time. I think it'll waste a lot of time for very, very little benefit. And I get it that if you're one of the people that benefits from this, if you're one of the players that wanted to still play the crew or something like that, like you may be like, I win. It's one of those like, yeah, a little bit wins here and there and a lot lose, as we have to now invest time and we have to deal with the regulation that's in the system. You want minimum regulation in order to protect. I don't think this is actually protecting. I think that's a framing issue that we're having here. So I agree with Asmon. I don't think the idea like, we just don't want any regulation. And I think, again, Thor is not understanding what Ross is originally pitching. So he's not disagreeing with the right thing.
Live service games then. Don't agree to those terms.
Yeah.
No, he's getting a new thing wrong now. We're not against them existing. We're against them being destroyed with no recourse for the customer.
Yeah.
Pair Software then goes on to talk about like the business practice of misleading consumers into thinking that what they're buying is a product as opposed to a license to a product, which is a totally separate thing. And then he criticizes
just because they rename something doesn't mean that it's a good idea or that it's good for a consumer. Maybe this is like a fucking socialism take, but if a business practice has no upside for the customer, then I don't really think it should exist. Why should a business practice exist at all if it has no upside for the customer?
So why should a business practice exist if it has no upside for the customer? Imagine it was not a downside for the customer, but it was a big upside for the company. And when we're dealing with the difference between a license and a product, I'm not a lawyer. I'm just like wading into things over my head here. So I just want to acknowledge that first up. You're getting like opinions from a dude who was in the military and then worked in game dev, and this comes back to that idea of the expiration, like, of goods, the decay of goods over time. Digital goods don't follow the rules. How do we allow them to decay? Well, it happens when hardware goes obsolete. That's one mechanism. Are there any other mechanisms that should be in play where, I don't expect, I know that whatever, like Leatherman says that they have a lifetime guarantee on their multi-tools or something like that. Fine. there's a lot of products that we use that don't have that as you use them, they decay. Digital products don't. How do we deal with that? Well, do we make the companies that build them have to maintain them for all time? And again, that's a mischaracterization. He's not saying that. But there is this part where, like, where's the limit of this, of how much you have to do to try to make sure that somebody who once bought a product, played it for some amount of time, presumably, or they wouldn't probably want to keep playing it, now has to continue to make that playable by somebody in some state and give them the tools to do so. Because that takes time and effort and money. It takes thought. It's a bunch of people who are doing one thing and not doing something else. And maybe we could say, well, these big companies, they've got plenty of people and they should be able to do that. And I'm like, yeah, well, guess what? Big companies are inefficient. One, don't really want them doing that. And two, it's going to be more expensive than you think. It's always going to be more expensive than you think when it gets to like complex tech stacks. And I can't, for me, I just feel like it's a lose. So I actually think there's an indirect gain to the consumer. I guess coming back to the point, I think if the company is not burdened by that unnecessary regulation, they can do a better job of serving the consumer. And that's the benefit to the consumer, but it's indirect. And you might not buy that. You might say, well, I don't trust that company and they suck and whatever. And I'm like, cool, don't buy their games, right? Like, we should put them out of business because they're a sucky publisher or studio that doesn't value their players and all this different stuff. Like, stop playing their games. And by the way, that's kind of happening in some sense to certain publishers right now who are no longer trusted to deliver quality products. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a positive thing. That pressure that they're now under, because they have to come back and go like, what's the consumer-focused thing to do? Which should be like, we want to make great games that players love. There's another thing they could do to build player trust, which is, hey, I'll give you access to some things in our back catalog. Or I'll build some unique server code that doesn't give away any of our proprietary information, any of our IP, anything sensitive that might cause risk to any of our live products. And I'll find a way to like cut that code around so that the servers and the clients can all talk together and you can have access to that and knock yourself out and you can go play old games. The reality is that's a very low return investment of time, in my opinion. It might be a good PR bump, and players might be like, oh, yay, look, they're doing the right thing. And then almost nobody's going to go play those games. Or if they do, it's going to be like, yeah, I played them, and then I stopped again. And the game's dead again, right? Except for, like, again, the few people that are playing. And you're like, well, those people win because they bought it, and they get to keep playing it. And now they've got the server code and whatever, like some bare-bone version of the server code with nothing sensitive in it. And, like, yeah, did I want them investing that time doing that? If they think that they should, in order to regain some player trust, great. They're welcome to. And I think publishers have done stuff like this in the past. They are welcome to do that. We're saying that they have to, and that they have to build that into end of life for a product. I don't think that's good ROI. I don't think that's good ROI when I say that, I don't mean for the business, ROI is such a business term. I don't think that's a good return on investment for the player. I do not think that's a win for the player. It's also not a win for the developer. I don't think anybody wins in that case. I think we all lose. So let them do it if they want to. If they don't and the game just dies, okay. And this is, again, where it does matter what the difference between a license and a good is, but all these different things. But we also are dealing with digital things that don't decay.
Killing Games for not being specific about that thing that he is bringing up, as opposed to what Stop Killing Games is talking about. So he's using that against them for some reason. And then Ross goes into, like, the license talk.
Our problem is not with licenses failing to inform people. Blizzard says they can take away your purchase for no reason.
Yeah, I think that's bullshit. They shouldn't be able to do that. If they do, they should have to give you your money back. There's somebody saying they don't have to acknowledge, understand the problem. This is about giving away the code. So this is one thing that a lot of people might not understand is that you don't need to be an expert in coding to realize that you're getting scammed. Just because somebody knows a lot about coding and they understand it better, I think Pirate Software probably understands coding better than me, Ross, or Charlie. I would assume that to be the case. But again, think about how many other things, we don't know a lot about. Like, we don't know how to make a car. We don't know how to make an airplane. We don't know how to do any of this. But does that mean that we can't ask for safer cars and safer airplanes at better prices that are reasonable? No. Or medicine or something like that. So the reality is that...
I'm going to jump in here. If you recognize you don't know as much as this person may about what actually Stop Killing Games is asking, which I've said I don't know as much about as a server-side engineer or back-end engineer and infrastructure engineer in the game space would, I might be overstating some of the complexity of this. Maybe it's much easier than I thought. Again, welcome to have that person come in and correct me. If you don't know as much, you should have humility, because I might say, I want a faster car that's safer and less expensive and more, prettier, whatever. Cool. you can't have all those things at the same time. Well, I want them. And if you can't give them to me, you're scamming me. Now, again, I don't want to straw man Asmon's argument, but there's this idea of like, hey, if you don't understand the code, you may not recognize when there's a scam happening or when somebody's taking advantage of you and when they're not. Now, this thing that Blizzard has, the right to terminate, blah, 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 without notice to you, I guarantee that's in there because, like, legally they felt like they had to do that. And who knows if it's for what complex reason the lawyers did that thing. With this, like, we should have humility because actually what it does mean is, look, I might feel like I'm being scammed, but the thing that I don't see in this from the Stop Killing Games is just like, what is the win case? The company, and maybe it's this, maybe it's like, look, I'm Ubisoft. I released the Crew. The Crew, some people liked it. A lot of people bought it. They liked it. A lot of people kept playing it. I released the Crew 2. I wanted everybody to buy the Crew 2, so I shut down the Crew. Maybe that's what happened. Again, I don't have context on this. I'm making this up. So I shut down the Crew. And that to force people to buy the Crew 2. Because I realized too many people were still playing the Crew because they liked that more. I felt like this a little bit when Destiny 2 came out. I kind of was like, I like Destiny 1 more. I wish I'd just keep playing Destiny 1. But over time, people filtered off of Destiny 1 and into Destiny 2 or onto other games if they didn't like Destiny 2. And like that's just the way it goes, right? I think I went back and I tried to play like Destiny 1 at some point. I can't remember when, or I can't remember. Maybe I didn't even. Maybe they like couldn't find a way to do it. I don't know. But it was like, hey, cool. That Destiny 1 like was effectively like it's not really there anymore. And I even if I could, maybe I just have to download it. I don't know. I'm just not going to. I'm just not going to play it. Now, maybe someone else is like, yeah, but I love Destiny and I paid for it and I bought all the DLCs and it was amazing and I want to show someone Vault of Glass and it was so cool. Fine, great. Maybe you can do that, but if they turn off the servers, you can't anymore. Sorry, that's what happens. I don't think we need to be protected from that. I think that's just part of the cycle of games, digital products, these sorts of things. But if Ubi did that, if they were like, hey, look, too many people are still playing, like more people are playing the Crew than are playing the Crew 2. We want to move them over. Let's just shut down the Crew. Maybe that'll get them all to shift. Look, part of me goes, okay, that's your right. That's a really dumb decision. That is obviously not a player-focused decision, and you're shooting yourself in the foot, right? You're burning your own credibility. Those players aren't going to be fans of you. Some of them, sure, that might work for, but a lot of them are just going to be really annoyed at you, and you're building yourself a lot of negative attention. And so, to me, this is almost like there's a self-correction of like people are going to dislike you and be more hesitant to pre-purchase your stuff and more hesitant to buy your products and more suspicious whenever you make a game. If you make a really great game, my guess is people will still buy it. But I have seen that some of these studios that have done some practices that seem a little scummy, I wouldn't say scammy, but scummy, they are, going down. They're moving in the wrong direction when it comes to their bottom lines. And I think a lot of them thought they could get away with more than they could when it comes to just like market forces naturally correcting, players responding to this stuff. You need the regulation when that is an insufficient mechanism to prevent bad actors from doing bad things that harm consumers, or if it's like depending on the type of harm, right? Because again, this is just Ubisoft, and I'm making all this up, maybe saying like I don't want to support the Crew anymore, so everybody moves to the Crew 2, so I shut down the servers. Haha, I forced you. Oh no, now you're all mad at me. I'd say it was a dumb decision. Should we regulate that they can't do that? Had they had an end of life and said, well, here's the servers, folks, like you can go set them up on your own, would a ton of the players that had played the Crew gone online and gone to like wherever you download the servers and wherever those things were created and started jumping into them? And would they have like had a thriving the Crew that was as big as it was when they were running? No. Some people would have, most people wouldn't have, and they just would have moved on. And it's okay. You don't necessarily know when you're being scammed. Sometimes, actually, you aren't being scammed and you think you are because you don't understand all the variables involved. And that doesn't mean you're bad. You might be right to be suspicious in our modern world. But don't also assume you're right. Have a little bit of humility as you approach it and go, well, what might be those other perspectives? Because just because you feel like you're being scammed doesn't mean you are. So like, don't drive on that. Actually understand that opposing position. I'm open to being wrong about what's involved with this, but I kind of take the same stance. Like, this is not trivial. It's not trivial. It's not just, just hand over the code. That has a lot of ramifications in other areas that could be bad. So
no, or medicine or something like that. So the reality is that, yes, while somebody might have more knowledge in the topic, that doesn't necessarily mean that that knowledge overrides other people's desire to be treated fairly. And I think if you applied this logic...
It just means they might not know what it means to be treated fairly. And they might be able to be convinced that when they were being treated fairly, they actually weren't being treated fairly. This gets really complicated because it's that idea of like, I don't want to feel like I'm being treated unfairly. Maybe you weren't. And maybe you just didn't understand. Maybe here's a simple example, but it's kind of extreme. So no analogy is perfect. I'm not necessarily like, this isn't an argument from analogy. I'm just throwing this out there as an analogy to think about. If you were like, but I really need to get on that plane so I can go to where I'm trying to go, and I saw some other people get on that plane, you didn't realize that the people who got on the plane had a different purpose. They aren't actually going, like, maybe you're at the wrong terminal or you're going there, and they're like, no, you shouldn't get on this plane. It's like, you're treating me unfairly. You let those other people get on the plane. I can't get on the plane. It's like, no, there's a good reason you can't get on the plane. Maybe the plane is unsafe right now, or they're actually doing some work on there, or they're cleaning it, or like there's a bunch of reasons why you can't get on the plane right now, or it's the wrong plane. And you aren't, but if you're just like, yeah, but you're treating me unfairly because I saw other people get on and I want to get on the plane too because I think I should. Like, imagine if you showed up into an airport, you didn't know what the rules were and you just assumed that the first plane you saw that was being boarded was like, well, that must be my plane. And you walked over and you're like, there, like, let me on. And they're like, no, your ticket isn't right. And you're like, well, all those other people got on and they had the same piece of paper I did. It's like, well, it wasn't the same. You're like, well, that person's obviously stupid. No, not necessarily. They might just not know how airports and tickets work. The challenge is then when you have the humility to be corrected by that individual who says like, hey, that's actually not the right plane. You have a ticket for a different plane. Let me like get you to the right gate. Again, it's not a perfect analogy. I'm just throwing it out there. It's possible for us to feel like we're being scammed, for us to feel like we're being mistreated when in fact we may be treated appropriately or even sometimes nicely, like better than expected. I've worked as a cashier and there are times where customers were very rude to me after I tried to be nice to them because I don't think they understood what I was trying to do, how I was trying to like help them with something, and they got offended by it. You know, that's not that uncommon in the service industry, to have somebody misunderstand you trying to help someone as like an affront, like you sort of mistreating them and like, why are you treating me badly? That doesn't mean that they don't have that feeling. It just means that feeling isn't necessarily authoritative over the circumstance.
Overrides other people's desire to be treated fairly. And I think if you applied this logic to other situations where people don't have that knowledge in, it would become immediately true that that's the case.
Sounds pretty clear to me. Our problem is those terms are so hostile to consumers and the medium that they should be...
And that's the thing, is that just because you put something in your terms of service, the terms of service does not override the law.
Taken off the table entirely.
Yeah, it's not like you can just like that cancels it out.
Forget video games.
That's not how it works.
If you look at basic commerce for hundreds of years, when you paid money, you either got to keep what you paid for, or if it was a service, you were told when your access ends.
Yes.
The vast majority of online-only games do neither of those.
He's exactly right. That is a huge problem. Now, Pirate Software is correct here about the...
And this is where, for me, I'm taking this angle, which is an interesting angle of we don't really have a good way to conceptualize digital goods that do not decay and expire. My shirt will expire, my car will expire, all the products I have around me, my computer will expire. The closest thing we have to that in digital products is if, I've got a game that's on a 3.5-inch floppy or like a 5.25 floppy disk, right? I don't have the hardware anymore to put that game in. And if I did, I don't have an operating system that knows how to run that. That's the closest thing we have to digital product obsolescence. Still haven't figured out how to pronounce them. That's the closest thing we have. That is not like many other things that we use as product. Digital goods have a very long, arguably a virtually infinite shelf life. Practically for a lifetime, they don't expire. You have the game, and then you can play the game for the rest of. The game will exist in code for a long time as long as you keep backing it up and you move it from like hard drive to hard drive because the hard drives will eventually fail. But that software will remain viable in some sense for a very long period of time, unlike all those other products we're talking about. And this is the concern. I think if you actually shove this in, I worry, do we want games to be rented, not bought? I don't. I don't want studios and publishers to start trying to figure out how they can dance around regulation to try to conserve the ability of every consumer to play every game they've ever bought, regardless of whether it's being actively supported or not, through the release of code or some provision or mechanism that allows players to continue doing that as if that was very cheap. The alternative are things like we rent our games. We try to get around because it may be worth it to do that rather than to try to pay this cost. Maybe not. Maybe they would just tank it as cost. And then I think, like I said earlier, it's a tax on everybody. Be careful about, like, yes, I get it. That's the way commerce has always worked. We're now in the internet age. Things on the internet are dying all the time. Interestingly, like web pages die and can't be recovered. You have this problem that things on the internet do die, but the code, the software of, like, if I bought a game and it's sitting on a hard drive and I keep backing it up onto different places, I probably can have it for a very, very long time, unlike most of the other products that I would ever buy and use. Like houses decay, you have to maintain them. It's not on the manufacturer of the house to maintain it past a particular point. It's on you to maintain it. And so that's my answer to this, is like, well, if you want to play this old game, you need to figure out how to play it. You still have the client-side code. And that would be where I would probably agree with Ross if he were to take a stance of like, hey, I don't want you releasing a patch that destroys what the game is, that like deletes the game. So that was like, hey, I bought the game, I've got the game. But hey, if you turn off things that required to run the game in its default state, then I need to figure out the other one. The analogy I used in the first, if we all end up in electric cars on an electric grid and there's no gas stations anymore, if I still want to run my gas car, I have to go find the gas. And by the way, it'll probably exist because someone will want to run their gas car, and it'll be very expensive to get gas, but there will be some boutique gas stations around, or people who will find it worthwhile to charge enough money to make it worthwhile to like create, refine oil into gas, unleaded gas that will run in people's cars, and then give that to the people who still want to drive around in their gas vehicles while everybody else is electric. But that's not the car company's problem.
Now, Pirate Software is correct here about these companies that will mislead consumers.
I don't think that Ross's solution to that would be sufficient, because the developer could say that the game will be live for at least 1 year, and then that could give them an out later on, and it would create the same problem. You need to have more inclusive language to avoid situations like that, where companies create dishonest timeframes in order to avoid this responsibility.
So great, exactly. Like Asmon just nailed it. That's it. Like you have to not look at. You're looking at impact, and you're looking at incentive, and you're looking at intention, right? These are three different things. There's the intention I want to achieve. Then there's the incentive I create through whatever I did to try to reach my incentive, to reach my intention. And then there's the impact that I actually caused. And like I was saying, imagine then game companies, like this is where I agree with them. If you were to try to do this, you have to be more firm than this, because it would just be like, okay, cool, you're only guaranteed 1 year or whatever it is. And by the way, it might be as tight as they could make it. Like, hey, yeah, you paid $60 for your game. You are guaranteed 1 year, and if we decide to, we can be generous to you and keep running it past that. But you're only guaranteed 1 year from this date of launch, right? Because you could specify things like that. And this is how studios and publishers and these things would behave to get around it. And that, I think, would actually cause more problems down the road for everybody, especially for players. So good insight from Asmon in terms of like, yes, there are secondary effects here. There are ways that people would respond to this, but the problem is, I think he's like, so you need to get firmer with the regulation. You need to be harsher with it. And I'm like, actually, that may just make this worse. You may continue to have, I can't guarantee this, you may continue to have an issue of, with the intention that you're going for, you're actually having a negative impact on things more than a positive, because again, some people win. Like in every time you introduce regulation or a rule change or whatever, like laws and everything, somebody usually wins, somebody loses. The question is this the net gain for society? Don't think we are in this case.
And this is something that the lawyers would figure out. But again, this is something that you derive from an initiative.
I don't trust the lawyers and the politicians to figure this out. Now, maybe I'm just distrustful of lawyers and politicians. Maybe everybody else is like, lawyers and politicians are the most trustworthy people ever, and they don't screw this sort of thing up. Don't think so. I think there's a lot of people who would also agree with me on this. I don't trust lawyers to figure this out. I don't trust them to understand it. And so I think the law would be written. There would be the obvious intention, which would be something like what Ross is putting together the petition for, and then there would be other intentions that would get nested into that, and then there would be a bunch of incentives created that would lead to a bunch of impacts, and it would. I just don't think it would work out well. I don't think it would work out well for players.
A specific end date? Yeah.
through this fraudulent advertising on what you're actually buying, because in a lot of cases you
require
don't
private service
own
support?
any of the shit that you're buying. It is pretty much a rental. You get a permission slip to access the content. That is an issue, and not making it abundantly clear to consumers.
I think that entire practice is something that should be reevaluated. A license is a construct. This is a legal construct that's created by people. This is different than ownership. Like, owning something is having it in your hand. A license is something that is theoretical. It doesn't exist in any sort of physical sense. And because of that, I think that we should really reevaluate what a license means. Why is it okay that we've turned every single product into a license that can be revoked, removed, or taken away from you with really no recourse to the customer?
I come back, digital product, not physical product. Hold World of Warcraft in your hand. You could hold a hard drive that contains code for World of Warcraft, but technically it requires a bunch of other stuff for that to work. You're not actually holding World of Warcraft in your hand, you're holding a hard drive with a bunch of ones and zeros in your hand. Now you could say, like, well, I've got a client for World of Warcraft on here. I'm like, okay, you bought that, you own that. And again, let me just say this. I'm more open to the idea that we could redefine ownership so that we understood what a digital good was, and we created rules around what it means to own a digital good as a product, and that licenses are perhaps not a great solution to that. I am totally open to that, having not being a lawyer in this space. I'm like, yeah, maybe that would be good. And maybe the reason we use licenses is because, big companies are doing that to cover their own butts, and it's not actually a consumer win. Maybe I'm speaking out of turn here from my own ignorance. I don't think this has been abused a ton, because to abuse this, okay, no, I'll take that back. I do believe there are large companies, particular operating system companies, that have done some things, that tried to make some things using this like license language to take advantage, and that they are almost in the too big to fail category. So I'm more open to this argument. I'm more open to the idea that, like, hey, the way we think about licenses versus products might not be great. I think it stems from this idea of we don't know what to do with digital goods as opposed to physical goods. And that's an underlying thing that's jumping up for me in my head. Maybe that's already solved. Somebody's got that. I'm like, no, I know how to solve that. That's what's jumping up for me. So I guess I'll say this. Initially, I was like, yeah, no, not really. And now I'm like, yeah, maybe there's some validity here. This is not what Stop Killing Games is about. It's a side point. And actually, I think Ross said that earlier. Maybe, if I'm not misquoting.
That is what you are buying is a problem, and so too is the actual agreements, as Ross demonstrates with Blizzard, where it says they can just completely terminate it for no reason at all. It really does go against the basic idea of commerce entirely. Video games are a totally different ball game when it comes to that, because half the time you don't realize that you're just buying an admission ticket to a game. You're not actually buying the game. You also don't know how long that's going to last. Again, to go back to Concord, that shit lasted less than a fucking rainstorm, basically. Like, there is just so many.
Concord's, though, an interesting example where, and this is, let's say market forces operating. Concord refunded its players. So, like, Sony refunded its players for the purchase of Concord. Now, you could argue, probably because of the licenses that all those players accepted, they didn't have to do that. Why did they do that? Because they understood. It is such a breach of trust if we shut the servers off after 8 days, which I think is what it was, because I remember trying to go and I was like, okay, let me just try this Concord thing. Everybody's saying, like, it's not doing anything. Let me just see. Like, I like some shooters. I'm not a big hero shooter person. Let me give it a shot. And I was like, wait, what? It's gone? What the heck? It's been like a week and a half. And it was offline. I think it was 8 days. But they refunded everybody. They didn't have to, according to their license agreement, most likely. They did. Because both sides get a vote in this at a very practical level. Now, regulation can force decisions in this space, but to me, that's an example of, like, no, I won't say the whole system works, but like that's an example of Sony going, hey, we want to do right by our players because we don't want a bunch of angry players and a lot of terrible PR about crummy practices. By the way, look at some other major publishers that have done some crummy practice things. Intentionally or not, they get that negative PR. It's not good for business. So to some extent, like, Concord is an example to me of just natural market forces and the desire to, not tick off your audience working. Studios and publishers that are just fine ticking off their audiences, they're all on borrowed time anyway. And I think we're seeing that broadly. If you are not actually building things that your audience likes, or you're not taking care of your audience will move on. There's a lot of options out there. Concord is not a great example of this because they actually did refund. And maybe, I don't know, maybe I missed it and they're about to say that, but.
So I don't know why Pirate Software would be so harsh on Stop Killing Games for not addressing specific things that he himself is bringing up.
I think the reason why Thor was so hostile towards it is because he thought that it was unfair towards developers, and Thor is a developer, and so he's taking that perspective. Like, I don't think he looked at it from the perspective of a consumer, but he looked at it instead from the perspective of a developer, which, again, that's going to be an unpopular opinion to have because most people that consume content about video games aren't developers, they're players.
Again, I said this earlier, I appreciate Asmon sort of looking at the other perspective, his ability to flip into somebody else's angle and go like, well, I think this is probably the angle that person's coming at from, is a helpful one. That's a good skill to have in life generally, because you can often realize that like, oh, that person doesn't hate me. They just look at the world differently, or whatever it might be. Yeah, when I was watching the brief bits, I haven't watched Thor's video, but when I was watching the brief bits of Thor's video that I saw, it just sounded like he didn't understand it. So it would be hard to say like, well, he took a perspective of a developer or not, or this or that or the other, because I think he just didn't get it. Appreciate the ability to take multiple perspectives.
The quote developer? Well, I mean, he's still assuming that perspective, right? I mean, we all know that. I try to be fair, guys.
It just doesn't compute. It really is a video that did significant damage to an actually positive initiative that aimed to help consumers in the video game space. All based on his complete misrepresentation of it, which was a complete mess.
People said his perspective was wrong, even if it's from the developer. I didn't say that it was right. The majority of what he said I disagreed with even back then. You can go back and watch the video. And so this is something that I've been completely consistent with the entire time. Also, like, again, I think if a product doesn't exist in a way that's beneficial for a customer, then it shouldn't exist.
Gosh, oh man. So we're like going from this Stop Killing Games into like this very broad argument about we can't have a provision that harmful to the consumer. And it's, for me, I go, well, at what level is it harmful? Is it harmful? Like, what level of analysis do we have to go to? Let's take the Stop Killing Games. We say, hey, it's bad for players to lose access to games that they feel like they've bought or licensed or whatever, like however you want to frame it. Let's just assume that they've bought the good and like it's now expired, they've stopped running the servers, and now that person's lost access. Well, we want to stop that bad thing from happening. Okay, what's the cost of stopping it for everybody involved, for the system? And as you walk down that, you may discover, oh, it's actually worse when we stop that bad from happening at this first layer of analysis when we look at all the other layers. Open to disagreement there, but we should do that multi-leveled look at the situation. You also have to be really careful because there's a few things that exist out there in the world that I think are a net negative to society. Gambling, I think, is a net negative to society. Some people make a ton of money. A lot of people have their lives ruined. I don't like that, like I watch sports. I don't like the fact that in the US we're now allowed to make gambling ads. For a long time we were not allowed to. We're allowed to because it's a free country. You know what? We used to have rules that said you couldn't make gambling ads. Now we're allowed to have gambling ads. I think we're worse off for that. I think we're generally worse off. Some small number of people are wealthier. Most people are worse off. Another one is pornography. I think pornography is a net negative. It's a net negative for like just about everybody involved. In all of these cases, there's an early dopamine hit. There's a first level of analysis where like, this seems to be good. As you work through more, you realize like, this may be a net negative on society. Okay, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that like anything that ends up netting out negative? How do you even analyze all that? How do you go through all those layers? We're making a ton of assumptions here. It's cheap to say, and perhaps, again, it's just a principle being articulated. Hey, we should try to avoid having things in license agreements or otherwise that are just pure harm to the consumer. And like, great. Yep, that's totally fair. Let's look at that through the lens, like the more complex lens. And what you often discover is like, holy crap, this is really complex. Like human systems are incredibly complex. They are not something where anybody can fully understand all the aspects of how human systems function. And because of that, you end up in this situation where you're like, oh, okay, so what are we supposed to do here? Do I allow this thing that seems negative but may not be, or this thing that seems positive but ends up creating harm? Intention, incentive, impact, right? I do something with an intention, I create incentives, it has an impact. Often the impact doesn't match the intention. This is common in regulation. This is common when companies try to do things. There's a lot of reorgs that have existed in the world that had a great intention of like making everything better for everybody inside the organization. And when you actually like peel back the layer 6 months later, everything is the same or worse as it was because of the nature of the reorg. So anytime you're doing any of this, that's one of the reasons of like my bias is towards less regulation if we can let some other thing handle this. Because, by the way, if there was enough of an uproar among players around the publishers that did not in some way allow private servers or whatever to emerge, if there was enough of an uproar from players that like publishers started actually being financially hit for this, greater than the cost of providing players with the ability to create private servers for old games or whatever it was, for like things that didn't sunset or shut down or whatever, where the servers are basically turned off. And if it became monetarily wise, let's say, for those businesses to like, oh yeah, we should just do this stuff, they do it. And the market force would take care of it. The reality is there isn't actually that. That most players do move on and they play new things. And yeah, they're like, oh, I wish I could go play. Like, I've thought, like, I wish I could go play Mech Warrior, the original Mech Warrior. I just thought it was a really cool game back in the day. Maybe it's on Steam now. I don't know. I haven't looked in a while. But like the old original, you like shoot someone's leg off and you could do really cool things with the configuration of your ship. I don't like the modern Mech Warriors as much. They just don't feel like they gave as much customizability. But that's really hard for me to do now. And that's not even because Mech Warrior was an online game. Because it was, you had everything I needed. It's just that it ran on DOS. And it's an absolute pain to like get everything figured out so that I could actually play it and have it work correctly. Same things happen when I tried to play like TIE Fighter and things like that. There's some old games that just struggle because the controls aren't even right. Like Dark Forces, Star Wars Dark Forces. You have to like do a lot of rejiggering things to get it to function. You know what? In the end, even though part of me is like, yeah, I'd love to play that again. That was really cool. One, when I go back and play it, I'm like, this is really why games have improved a lot. And two, not always. Sometimes I'm like, whoa, this is really cool stuff. But two, it's more difficult. It's more painful than it's worth. Like the pain is not worth the gain of me actually playing that. And so sometimes I'll try and I'll give it a few shots and then I'll be like, never mind. I'm just gonna go play something that actually works. That's the reality of it. So the market forces here are not getting the outcome that Ross wants, and as a result of that, he's like, well, I want the government to give me the outcome I want, and I go like, I'm really worried about the impact that's going to have.
Or choose not to make these decisions. The companies are simply asking them to make the decisions.
Try to tell me that every studio needs to run their live service game indefinitely or not run one at all.
Oh no!
Yeah.
He wheeled out that line about publishers having to support the game forever. He was literally watching
a lot of people talked about that when it came out.
Video earlier where it says it won't do that in big letters. That wasn't enough. We just can't stop gamers from going there, even when we spell it out.
That's the last clip I want to show from this section on the private software video. It is very simply asking that when the game has reached the end of its life cycle, the publishers, developers don't want to work on it any longer,
the vagueness is keeping the initiative.
Turn it over to the community to still be in a playable, accessible state so the product can still exist. There is some more nuance, obviously, to how that works, given like publisher, developer licensing, and a lot of like the code, the binary, that kind of thing. There is a lot at play.
I'm not sure if I agree that the company should have to relinquish the code. I'm not sure if I agree with that. I think that might go too far. I'd really have to think about that more because there's a lot of proprietary code and things like that. That would make no sense. Yeah, I think that would be too much.
Asmon, thank you. I also will appreciate Penguin Zero. He initially said, "Is like this, we're simply asking for." And it's like that's not necessarily simple. And then he did kind of say, "Hey, look, there's more. Like there's publishing deals. There's nuance to this." Yes, and so there's a cost, and there's a relative cost, and it's not just a bottom line cost for a publisher here. Because the publishers, by and large, are not just, I get it, there's always some C-level executive, maybe the CEO who's like, I'm just trying to extract wealth from players. But broadly, these studios and publishers are filled with people who are like, have the interests of the gamers in their minds somewhere. Perhaps that's even why they're in the industry getting paid less than industry average to make games. There is nuance, there is complexity. It's not simply, it's complex, and because of that, there's a cost. And with the cost means we have to think about the trade-offs. One, I appreciate Asmon actually calling that out. I don't know if it's okay for them to give up the code because it is proprietary and there are actually risks to other players in other games if they do that, depending on what the servers are and if they use some of the same server architecture or whatever in different environments, some of the same server code. And I appreciate Penguin Zero calling out like there's more to this. It's not quite this simple. You're right. And that's the problem. The devil is in the details. If this was trivial, I think we wouldn't even have to think about it because all the publishers would just do it. If this was easy and not expensive, then like, hey, we're shutting the game down. Here's the code, or here's some way for you to continue using it. Like, have fun, or I don't. But it's actually difficult. It's even simple, lightweight versions of this I think are more complex than people realize, and becoming more and more complex as games get more and more complex and require more code and more different code doing more different things. It's all interacting with each other, only some of which is living on the player's computer. So anyway, yeah. Appreciation for Asmon, appreciation for Penguin Zero, kind of calling this out. Maybe we've stopped just slapping the straw man of Thor who didn't really read the thing or understand it before commenting.
As mentioned in the beginning, most of Stop Killing Games hasn't been successful in getting change. And Ross has dedicated so much of his life to this, and it's clearly taken a big toll.
It's been a lot.
Now he's doing everything he can for this last-ditch push to try and help. And there are two big things coming up that can do so. It's what I linked at the very beginning of the stream, at the very beginning of the video, about the resources in the description. It's in regards to this.
One is for the UK to sign a government petition to bring this issue before Parliament. Though keeping it real, I'm not terribly optimistic about this one, since the government response has been a mess by every definition. But the one that has a lot of power, so much so I think it could change the course of gaming history, is the European Citizens Initiative. Now, I said I'm approaching this like a time traveler because with the trajectory we're on, these are both going to fail. Again, this one is crazy powerful, but the hurdle we just couldn't get past was that it requires 1 million signatures from citizens of EU countries. And we've only made it just under halfway. But what a lot of people don't realize is that in the EU especially, it's almost a state of lawlessness regarding the practice of game destruction. Is that the vast majority of games with an online...
I feel like this is the case everywhere. Like, it's kind of like an uncharted territory. Because, like, we're just now entering into the phase of live service products going end of service. Or things that you buy through a license on the internet that disappear. Like, really, it's kind of a new phenomenon. Because, like, in 1995, for example, you would rent, a VHS tape of fucking, I don't know, Ben-Hur from, what do you call it? I don't know, like, I'm trying to think, a Blockbuster, that's the one. And, like, you would just take it and you take it back, right? It's very simple, it's easy to understand. Or you would buy the movie, and then you could just simply watch the movie when you would want. And so now you have all these complexities, and I don't think that the law has caught up to the culture around these complexities. That's fundamentally what the problem is that the technology has advanced way faster than the law has.
I agree with that. And for me, you're asking these governments who can't get their stuff together, Ross, who you're frustrated in dealing with, to go and create regulation about a thing they absolutely do not understand. And that the politicians and the lawyers will get together and, yes, they'll try to consult experts and you don't want to... Politicians and lawyers are not malicious forces attempting to do evil, but I think one of the problems is they will not fully understand what's going on, and governments are somewhat famous for short-sighted action. As I look at governments today, I don't think that's getting better. With the best of intentions, perhaps, but not always, but perhaps. Are these the people we want regulating this? Do we want this regulated, or do we let market forces take care of it? Maybe I'm revealing my more, economic conservatism here. And maybe it's just my game developer bias coming out. I don't trust him. One, I disagree with the thing. I think it'll do more harm than good. And two, I definitely don't want it to be debated in front of, the EU to judge on this because they don't understand it. And it would be difficult to get them up to speed on it. I think a lot of really smart people would have difficulty understanding the nuance of this. I don't think I understand all the nuance of this. I'm open to being corrected on what I'm saying, but I don't think that the takes that we're seeing here, I guess part of me is look, if this petition actually gets signed by 1 million people, I think that would be bad, not good. I think it would harm players and the industry.
Say they can be terminated at any time for any reason. Or Blizzard likes to say any or no reason. But according to the EU Commission, that might be a violation of Directive 93/13 EEC, which protects consumers against unfair terms in consumer contracts.
Yes. So this is again what I was saying. The idea that, you signed up for this, so it's okay, that's bullshit. That's not how it works.
If that term is unfair, that means that part of the contract is null and void.
He goes on to explain how powerful that can be because of what a mess that is. Because there is so much gray area with how the video games currently operate in regards to those protections, it would be a legal headache that would require an analysis of the laws or implementation of new laws that could lead to, hopefully, an improvement.
And that's the goal. But that's not something that anybody in this video would be able to do. This would have to be defined by people that have extensive understanding of copyright and IP law, and basically lawyers and politicians would have to come to this conclusion. The initiative is just simply to bring awareness to the issue. It's basically saying we have a problem, but it's not giving a solution.
Comes to gaming. So the big hurdle was the signatures, needing 1 million, and currently it's at like 460,000, so it doesn't reach the threshold. I've been very vocal from the very beginning about how little faith I have in petitions, but that's just from the perspective of an American. In America, petitions are more worthless than toilet paper. You're better off just writing what you want on a note to Santa Claus and shipping it to the North Pole than you are doing anything with a petition in this country.
Are there tariffs?
I don't know how different it is in the EU. Maybe it really is this powerful there that could lead to...
I think it's very obvious that the European Union is more progressive about creating digital consumer protections. And I think that they are about probably 10 years ahead of the United States. So if it's going to happen anywhere, it will happen in the EU.
Yeah, this is one of those, it's trade-offs. It is trade-offs. He describes it as a good thing. There are probably some good elements to it. There are probably some not so good elements to it. Some of them, I'd probably be fans of. I'm a big, I think a lot of the privacy stuff, like GDPR, there are probably a lot of elements of that I would agree with, and then some of how it was implemented, I disagree with. It's that thing of there will be unintended consequences. You can't not act because there will be unintended consequences, because there will always be unintended consequences in a complex system. I gotta be careful. This has gotten into sorts of conversation about governments and policies and things like this.
Potential change and improvement.
And by the way, this is something that makes things better for everybody too. Because as soon as this is made available and made evident to everyone, then we can all see, hey, yeah, by the way, this is actually something that's very beneficial. This is something that's great. And it also, the companies, if enough countries have laws against these types of practices, then those types of practices become non-commercially viable. And as soon as that happens, that's whenever games change for everybody.
That's correct, and that's what's actually scary. So let's say you put the policy into place and it goes the way he says, and things change for the better, and everybody sees that. But already, just by the fact that an area like the EU did this means that it's now worthwhile. It's worth the cost to make changes on the studio side, the publisher side, whatever it is. Okay, cool. Well, we found out it was better and great. We were already making the changes because the law was in place. Let's say we do it and we find out it's worse. And it'll be worse. It'd be really hard to understand what it means for it to be worse, because the companies would abide by the law so that they don't get fined. And so they would have to invest resources in this. And there's an opportunity cost every time you invest resources. It means you're not investing them somewhere else, right? So, okay, I'm going to go have people, I'm going to hire people or invest in current people to go do this thing instead of solving existing live game issues or making new games or whatever else. And they're you can say well, there might be different people you could hire. But the thing is, we do know it's always opportunity cost. So whoever I send to do this, whatever money is spent towards it, will not be spent somewhere else. But let's say we did it and we discovered it actually wasn't good. It caused problems. It is difficult to remove laws. And this is one of the issues we have with the sort of growing body of laws that exist in sort of Western democracies, which are great, and I love them. But they have this problem of growing amounts of laws over time, because it's difficult to remove the laws, because we have to go through usually the exact same process it was to get it there, and then everybody's invested because they made a call to we said this was a valuable thing to do. And now we've discovered, oh shoot, it's causing problems. Except, are we going to acknowledge that, or are we going to look at the data through a lens that allows me to see it as positive? Anytime in the United States, the conservative position, let's say, does something, the conservatives are well, it's obviously a good thing, and the liberals are well, it's obviously a bad thing. And then whatever happens, they both rationalize their initial perspective. Same thing when the liberal side, you call this right or left or whatever, but the liberal side does a thing, and they think it's a great idea, and the conservatives think it's not. And then we all play out the outcomes, and everybody rationalizes. And so the problem is, once something's done, it is hard to undo, because we had the power to do it, and then we're invested in it, and then we want to see it succeed. And if it doesn't, it has to be such a colossal failure for it not to work. I'm making arguments here basically for the idea of government conservatism in some sense, which is that's where I sit on all this stuff. So fair enough. It's this idea though that when you go in and you start tinkering, the unintended consequences are going to happen. and you are unlikely to have a system set up that goes, oh shoot, that didn't work, let's pull it back, because you're unlikely to have, people are not going to see it that way. In this case especially, it's going to be very difficult if it caused more harm than good, but in a sort of subtle way, of again, that lost opportunity cost to both players and the studios and publishers. That is going to be something that you're almost certainly not going to see as a negative. And instead, you're just going to see the positive of the people that benefit from, like, oh, I can play the game that, that I bought, and it's 10 years later and almost nobody's playing it. And so they shut down the servers, but they had to make me a private server, a way to still play the game through private servers or something. And that cost them time and effort. But I win. And so the win is obvious. It's right in front of you. The loss is subtle. It's an opportunity cost. This is how we can end up with bad trade-offs that we don't realize are bad trade-offs, because it's hard to see both sides. Because the first layer analysis is, look, somebody won. And the only loss is like, oh, the company had to spend a little bit of money. It's like, well, that's not that big a deal. Just again, that's where I lean towards, hey, let's not, get regulators involved. But yeah, I agree with him. If something like the EU were to put some of this into practice, the whole, one, software would be put on notice, but video games especially would respond to it. They would probably realize, okay, cool, well, we don't want to get in trouble with the EU or not publish our games in the EU. That's a large market. It is now worthwhile to fix this rather than do that. And now we will have to hire people or assign people to do that and invest that time and money instead of anything else we might have done.
The games and preservation and all of what we've already talked about.
I think EU does a really good job on this.
I mean, that's really all that's left for the Stop Killing Games initiative, which sucks, but that's the position that it's in, unfortunately. And I wanted to talk about it because I really want to see something change with the games industry. I've said that so many times recently, but it's in such a sorry state. I mean, I'm talking big budget AAA space. Indies, I think, are absolutely crushing it. Absolutely.
I think big budget AAA games right now are in a transitionary period. And it seems like also one of the big reasons why I think AAA gaming right now is suffering is because it's subjected to something that's very upsetting to someone who has a monopoly, which is competition. When you have Chinese developers, Korean developers, and now Indian developers, and of course, obviously, you have some European developers. European is the West, but again, I'm talking primarily about America. You have people like Warhorse Studios that made Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, or you have it's not Sandbox, it's Sand something Interactive that made Expedition 33. So that's really what I think is happening, is that you're having more of these companies come in and compete against the Sandfall. Yeah, there you go. Sandfall Interactive. You're having them compete against these traditional studios, and the traditional studios are just simply too big or too large to compete.
So one, I agree with Penguin Zero that the industry's in a bad state. Two, I agree, Asmon has pointed to one element. I've pointed to several others in some of my other content about why I think AAA is struggling right now. If I were to underline it under everything, it actually is pride, and that relates to what he was talking about. I don't like competition because I'm supposed to be on top. I'm supposed to be the best. We're the best. And the reality is that proof is in the pudding, as they say, and you're not producing the best things. And we're seeing that because players aren't loving those things. And your response to that is not good because it's driven by, I think, the pride of the industry. And it could be a better response. It could be, there are better things I think AAA could be doing to create experiences that players would love for less money. But they have become large, inefficient bureaucracies, for lack of a better term. So anyway, I agree with these things. I probably have different, I've done some breakdowns of hey, it's this and this and this, and there's a set of things that I think are related to why AAA in the U.S., especially, and in parts of Europe as well, are in trouble. I'm curious how Penguin Zero is going to tie this back to why this regulation will be good. I don't actually think this relates to solving the AAA problem at all. If anything, this just adds another little thing that for those AAA companies to be figuring out and being distracted by, rather than actually solving the fact that they are in an unsustainable business model.
Those are just simply too big or too large to compete. That's what's happening
golden right now in the golden age of indie games. But overall, in the big budget games and the way the industry keeps pushing things, it sucks. So I wanted to talk about Stop Killing Games here. Hopefully things can turn around and maybe a huge W's around the corner for the Stop Killing Games initiative. We'll see. But anyway, I want to commend Ross for his hard work spearheading all of this for so long.
Ross has done a great job.
And that's really about it. So, yeah.
Well, anyway, thanks for time for telling people, and obviously, Ross responded. Takes time for telling people about this. Anyone didn't want to watch the video about it. We require EU publishers to having end-of-life plans for the company, and I think Pirate Software responded to this on Twitter, didn't he? Been reading through all the posts against me on my Stance Against Stop Killing Games initiative. Tons of people calling me a liar that I misrepresented the initiative. Also, lots of content creators dogpiling to get their pound of flesh. Let's dig into what I said. I put out 2 videos. Monetization on these videos is disabled, so it's not a ploy to increase revenue. In the first video, I go through what an initiative is, how it's not a law, and how it's starting the entire process. We have the crew. Okay, so I also harshly critique Roshkott's wording in the videos because they disparage the lawmaking process and the lawmakers, which doesn't benefit players or movement in any way. Sure, that's fine. I think this is all kind of beside the point, but sure. I mean, you're going to have a million debates and arguments about like what the right way to say things is. I can see why Pirate Software said this. Other people could see it as tone policing. It's really not relevant. And so let's just move past this. Talking about potential scenarios where a studio could be abused if it was implemented as written. Yeah, sure, right. And again, right, it's not a law like you said earlier, so that's the case. To recap, my main issue with this initiative is that it's broad in its approach to change the industry, and the exact language of the initiative, not the FAQ, requests that all games stay in a functional playable state. This is not feasible for all games at a technical level and could potentially restrict developers from making online-only games like MMOs. I don't know if it would restrict them, right? I mean, I don't know how it would really restrict them. As long as they had an end-of-life plan that people could just run their own server of the game, then I don't really see the problem with that.
I only saw snippets of what Thor said, so I don't want to comment a ton on that. It sounds like he's saying, like, hey, look, these are my main points. There were some things he said that seemed in contradiction to what Stop Killing Games said, so from that perspective, I think he was incorrect. He's calling out that hey, look, how would you actually do this? Could this discourage people from making some games? Maybe. I think the impact is more subtle. So he's actually going to some pretty, like, oh no, a studio would choose not to make an MMO because they would not know how to make a good end of life if it didn't work out. He also sounds like he actually did some analysis of the crew and how many players were there and that sort of thing. So that maybe it was like a totally wise business decision to shut it down or whatever. I don't know. I don't think we need to go to the extreme position of people aren't going to make games, people aren't going to want to make MMOs for us to say this might not be worth it. So I'm viewing this much more as like, hey, this is actually more complicated than you think, and I just don't want game developers wasting time on this when they could be doing stuff that's like making the next great game or making the next shot at a great game, you know, because again, not most games fail. Like this is a hard industry. It's a hits-driven industry. There's a lot of people who spent long time in it in multiple companies and never shipped anything that hit, or sometimes never shipped anything. Just had a game that was shut down after a game that was shut down after. It's a punishing industry to be in. To go, well, you have to invest time supporting old stuff or making old stuff something that players can continue playing. Because again, I don't want to, like, so that's what I mean when I say supporting. I don't mean you indefinitely have to support every game you've ever made. But just like you have to invest effort and time, you have to like hire people and point people at this problem. I don't think it's worth it. I don't think it's good for anybody, even though it feels like it's a hit, right? It feels like, oh man, but wouldn't it be so easy? I don't know. I don't think so. Sometimes maybe. There are some things. If I did just have a single player that had like a server and all that happened was there was like this check where it sent the check and said like, oh, if I don't get a response that I'm supposed to get, then you can't play the game. And then I shut off this server, and all I would need to do is just like, oh, I'll just comment out this little bit of code, or like remove this little thing that does the check, or I'll make it always return true, that like it got the check back. If it was that simple, you know, but in my opinion, that's probably something publishers should be thinking about doing anyway. I'm not saying they all are, but that's probably something they should be thinking about doing anyway, just because it's good to have people continuing to play games of yours that they love. This is the challenge with it, and where I described Ross, where it seems almost paranoid, is like, what is the conspiracy here to destroy the games? There isn't one. It's a pragmatic choice, and in a lot of cases, that pragmatic choice may be in the interests of players and not hostile to them. Maybe I'll be in the minority on this one.
Yeah, I'm not really sure about that don't make games. And also, like, by the way, I mean, maybe there are some things that shouldn't exist in a certain way because, you know, it's just not something that's good for the consumer, right? I mean, I think that's the main thing. And let's go back over here. Thor ignores private servers, the irony. Well, private servers, and here's the thing with private servers, is that how do you handle, like, in my opinion, this is the way that I see things, okay? And I'm talking about this ideologically, is that when you make a game and you cease to provide service for that game is now effectively abandonware. There's no way that a consumer can produce or play this game themselves. And I think in the case of abandonware, I think it's totally morally and ethically justified to recreate abandonware on your own. Because again, you're not taking money away from the publisher or the developer. The IP still applies. I don't care about that. I'm talking about the way I think it should be. Like, I think IP law in the U.S. is overly restrictive. I think it's way too restrictive. So I'm talking about the way that I think that it should be. I don't care how it is. I'm thinking about what is ethical in my view. I think that if you sell somebody something and you are selling this as like a product, and then the product ceases to function, the person should either receive their money back or they should have a tool to continue gaining the value out of that product. I think that's just fair.
So this is where, like, within limits, it's tough. I'm torn on this one. I'm not a lawyer and I don't know all the law stuff, but the idea that I agree with him that, like, I release a game, the game requires a server to run. Players play that game. I eventually, I shut off the server for some reason, whether it's spite or because it wasn't profitable, or no one was playing anymore. I don't know, whatever it was. I shut off the server. I agree that now becomes abandonware. If players decide to figure out how to reverse engineer that abandonware into something functional, so they build like an open sourced server to match their clients that allows them to have private servers for this thing, I'm okay with that. That might be hard. Am I obligated, or is the studio or publisher obligated to give them a tool to do that or to make that easy for them? No, I don't think so. I don't think they should have to invest in that at all. If they choose to, they might get some positive PR from their player base. But if they don't, I'm not bothered by it. When you've got those servers stood up, I think as long as you're not making any money off of it, I think that you're fine. Hey, we stood up a server, and this gets challenging because it costs money to run the server. So maybe like some people pay dues to get so that we can just keep running the server. But that's where it gets kind of weird. But it's like, look, if you're just running a server and you're accepting the cost of that, the challenge is when it's like, well, people are now donating to keep the server running. Because of that, you're technically making money, and even if it's all going towards running the server, that part gets a little bit more convoluted. But in the ideal case, I'm honestly okay with it. And again, ignoring sort of the law and the IP implications of this, because maybe someone would like a lawyer might be like, hang on, watch out, you just allowed this thing to happen that would be really bad for a lot of people. My gut is, I'm not that bothered by that. Somebody running a 15-year-old game on a local server and receiving donations so that they can, because it's expensive to run the server. I'm like, cool, good for you. Honestly, I know that some publishers and studios like go after those people and copyright infringement and whatnot. Yeah, I wouldn't if it was me. They're playing my game, right? They're playing a game. Yeah, I've abandoned it. I'm not running it anymore. Go ahead, enjoy yourself. And especially like this is one of the things where there's an opportunity here for the studio or the publisher, if they wanted to even support that or provide something for that. And it may cause them, depending on the size of that community, it may cause a boon for that community, and for the reputation of the publisher in response. So again, thinking of first, second, third order effects, it's not just the Ross who I think is thinking short term. I think it's also the publishers. I think more publishers and studios could benefit from thinking through this more in terms of how they garner player trust. But I want to leave that to them. I don't want to enforce it. So I think I agree with his ideal state of something like this, like abandonware. You do what you want with it. There is some, like, maybe the problem would be, hey, you take something that, you take my game that, I don't know, has a T rating or something, and you turn it into a bunch of like adults only wild content and shove that all over the internet or something. There is a corruption of perhaps my reputation that could occur there. But I think that's a very specific thing that if I was this publisher and you turned my game about Teletubbies into an adult thing, that like I probably would go after you, and perhaps that would be more justified because it is actually damaging the reputation of like my brand and the Teletubbies brand or whatever it is. I'm just making up the Teletubbies, whatever. Anyway. But like, yeah, so there's like weird edge cases where I think it would be more appropriate. But if they're just running a server, and they're playing the game because they really like the game, like, good, you made a game, people love it, they want to keep playing it, like, great, they figured it out. I would say get out of their way is probably the best thing to do, regardless of what the terms and conditions are, and regardless of what the law says. Obviously you have to follow the law, but like, that would be the ideal. So anyway.
Continue gaining the value out of that product. I think that's just fair. That's it. And like, again, like you don't need to, like, it's not about the law, it's not about copyright, it's not about anything else. It's just simply about very, very simple ethics and what is fair. And that's the way I see it. That's what I think is fair. And obviously I think that really kind of depends on, like, who you ask or whatever, but that's generally what my viewpoint on it is. That's called a guarantee policy? Yeah, exactly. Copyright's long, and you should lose copyright if you don't provide the service anymore. It's ethical? Yeah. I think so too. And you could even have, like, I would be willing to compromise with a grace period. I would be willing to compromise with them, ensuring that the service will be back up within a period of time if they're making a remaster of it or something like that. Like, there are, and again, this is something that they have to figure out legally, because this is very complicated and very prickly legally. Of course it is. But I think that at its core essence, this is something that I support. For this, the games they're publishing are all playable offline anyway because they're gameplay loops and are only based on the interplay interaction. Oh, this is about Thor and what he's doing. He's working. I didn't like Blizzard. I was working at Blizzard. Okay. I've been working with a discourse about it on stream. I never took my videos down, and I have not discussed the initiative in the 10 months it's been since they released the videos. So yeah, for those who scream he's doubling down, yes, I damn well am. I don't give a shit about this initiative and what it means for games developers and players in the future. To finish out, I do give a shit. I misread, excuse me. Just because I don't support this doesn't mean you should blindly follow me and the pretty words on the internet. Yeah, just look it up and figure it out for yourself. And so requires publishers to sell or license video games, customers, European Union, to leave said video games in a functional state, a playable state. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a lot of extrapolation that's going to go into this, and a lot of assumptions that need to go into this. Either turn the IP over, a customer shouldn't be able to make, sells the product. Like, this is, like, I would say this for sure. Not for sure, but I'm pretty confident about it. I think that if you're selling a game and you stop providing that game, and then somebody recreates that game not from your code, but they just reverse engineer it and they recreate it on their own, I don't really see that as a problem. Now, but there's a lot of complexities to this. Like, for example, like, let's say it's Super Mario, okay? Like, there's a Super Mario game. It's not, like, let's say it is. It's still IP theft, right? And so if you have a game and it's using certain IP, and then that IP is still held by the developer because of different games that they have that they're currently doing, that makes things, like, do you see how this makes things complicated? This does, it does very much make things complicated. And this is why you need a bunch of lawyers and people to, like, really figure out, like, what the right option for this is. And in my opinion, I think the first step is doing this for single-player games, right? And I know people are like, oh, that's what Thor said, that's not what it's about. I understand that. But I think that the first, cleanest, easiest, basically bottom of the totem pole, easiest solution is games that can be playable offline should be made to be playable offline. Like MMOs, that's like the last boss. Let's worry about the trash mobs first. That's what makes sense to me. That's the first hurdle. Yeah, exactly. That's why you need to be specific. Well, the problem is that an initiative like this is not about being specific. It's about identifying a problem, and then it's presented to lawmakers, and then lawmakers are specific in how they address the problem. It's not up to the initiative to be hyper-specific and use legal terms in order to explain this.
So, anyway.
Continue gaining the value out of that product. I think that's just fair. That's it. And like, again, like, you don't need to, like, it's not about the law, it's not about copyright, it's not about anything else. It's just simply about very, very simple ethics and what is fair. And that's the way I see it. That's what I think is fair. And obviously, I think that really kind of depends on, like, who you ask or whatever, but that's generally what my viewpoint on it is. That's called a guarantee policy? Yeah, exactly. Copyright's long, you should lose copyright if you don't provide the service anymore. It's ethical? Yeah, I think so too. And you could even have, like, I would be willing to compromise with a grace period. I would be willing to compromise with them, ensuring that the service will be back up within a period of time if they're making a remaster of it or something like that. Like, there are, and again, this is something that they have to figure out legally because this is very complicated and very prickly legally. Of course it is. But I think that at its core essence, this is something that I support. For this, the games they're publishing are all playable offline anyway because they're gameplay loops and only based on the interplay interaction. Oh, this is about Thor and what he's doing. He's working. I didn't like Blizzard. I was working at Blizzard. Okay. I've been working with a discourse about it on stream. I never took my videos down, and I've not discussed the initiative in 10 months it's been since they released the videos. So yeah, for those who scream he's doubling down, yes, I damn well am. I don't give a shit about this initiative and what it means for games developers and players in the future. To finish out, sorry, I do give a shit. I misread, excuse me. Just because I don't support this doesn't mean you should blindly follow me and the pretty words on the internet. Yeah, just look it up and figure it out for yourself. And so, requires publishers to sell licensed video games, customers, European Union, to leave said video games in a functional state, a playable state. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a lot of extrapolation that's going to go into this, and a lot of assumptions that need to go into this. Either turn the IP over, a customer shouldn't be able to make, sells the product. Like, this is, like, I would say this for sure. Not for sure, but I'm pretty confident about it. I think that if you're selling a game, and you stop providing that game, and then somebody recreates that game not from your code, but they just reverse engineer it and they recreate it on their own, I don't really see that as a problem. Now, but there's a lot of complexities to this. Like, for example, like, let's say it's Super Mario, okay? Like, there's a Super Mario game. It's not, well, like, let's say it is. It's still IP theft, right? And so if you have a game and it's using certain IP, and then that IP is still held by the developer because of different games that they have that they're currently doing, that makes like, do you see how this makes things complicated? This does very much make things complicated. And this is why you need a bunch of lawyers and people to like really figure out like what the right option for this is. And in my opinion, I think the first step is doing this for single player games, right? And I know people are like, oh, that's what Thor said, that's not what it's about. I understand that. But I think that the first, cleanest, easiest, basically bottom of the totem pole, easiest solution is games that can be playable offline should be made to be playable offline. Like MMOs, that's like the last boss. Let's worry about the trash mobs first. That's what makes sense to me. That's the first hurdle. Yeah, exactly. That's why you need to be specific. Well, the problem is that an initiative like this is not about being specific. It's about identifying a problem, and then it's presented to lawmakers, and then lawmakers are specific in how they address the problem. It's not up to the initiative to be hyper-specific and use legal terms in order to explain this.
And see, this is where I'm like, the lack of specificity. I can understand why Thor was concerned about this statement. What does functional playable state mean? What will a politician and a lawyer looking at this think functional playable state means? I have no idea. Who will they talk to? I don't know. While the idea of like we're just getting this petition signed so that people can have a conversation, but there's a vagueness to this, and that's deliberate because we want you to figure it out. Okay, that's a deep trust in a bunch of people that have very little understanding or expertise around the space of games. Now, I kind of agree as well, and this is where I wondered if Thor had this perspective earlier. I alluded to the idea of like maybe he was saying like, well, single player with DRM is like the right place to start if you were going to try something like this, and so try to be specific into that, targeting on that. And I think my gut, even as a game dev, is it would probably be easier to make most single player games just playable if you had the client code. But I say that with some amount of ignorance. I actually don't know how interlinked servers and single player games are in the modern world. If it's like not at all, or if it's actually like, no, that's a lot of work. And that matters. And that's where leaving the game studio to figure out, is it wise for us to invest this time snipping these few little connections or just removing this DRM check or whatever, versus like, oh my goodness, we're going to have to like figure out how this is we're basically going to have to build a mini server that will not share anything sensitive, like reveal our IP and code with all the players, or bundle it with the game so that someone, if they already own the game, they can just download this. How do you solve this? It's not as simple as you just have the client and now I just say, it's okay, the client can run by itself. I probably have to change things to make that happen. And that means I have to patch it. And that means like, do I have to send you, like I said, a little mini local server? Do I have to? There's a lot that might be involved. If it's easy, you should do it. But if it's easy, I think it's an easier sell. You should actually be petitioning the studio or the publisher to do it, not trying to get the law to make some rule and to create a legal precedent or a legal ruling of some kind, like to lock something in that actually defines what functional playable state is, and there's a big discussion around that. It's easy to say like, well, we just want to have the conversation. I get it, but the problem is once governments start having conversations about things, sometimes they change stuff, and sometimes they don't understand the impact of what they've changed. If I were to try this, I agree with Asmon, I would start with a single player. Even there, I would want to talk to engineers, like back-end engineers, infrastructure engineers, around like, hey, how interwoven are these things? Like, how much work is this? Because if you told me a lot for a modern single-player game, I would go like, oh, it's totally not worth it then. Yeah, no, go do other cool stuff. Versus like, oh yeah, I just have to comment out these three chunks of code and I know where they are and it's no big deal. If we patch that out, people could play this indefinitely on their own machine as long as the hardware is compatible. Okay, great. Well, maybe you can do that. But it's not free. I think that's the thing. It's not free.
Up to the initiative to be hyper-specific and use legal terms in order to explain this. Basically, they're not responsible for solving the problem, but they are responsible for identifying it. And that's basically it. Second Charlie, Justin Hayes, you're mad at me for being a dick to Ross. I'm sorry for that. Developer side has been constant battle people online for a decade. Online only. Movements like to showcase how little the general public understands about the game development, modern gaming architecture, and online games as a whole. Functional playable state on sunsetting has already met responses diminishing the effort needed to do that. It's not a simple hurdle to overcome, which is why I don't like the initiative. Yeah, it's complicated. I mean, in this...
Bingo. And by the way, it sounds like he's actually arguing for a more extreme thing. For me, it's even simpler than that, but I think it's... Gosh, this stuff is... Ah, man. We always think it's easy. I've been doing game dev for too long. I've worked with engineers for too long. You end up getting really suspicious of anything that's supposed to be easy.
It's not a simple hurdle to overcome, which is why I don't like the initiative. Yeah, it's complicated. I mean, and this is the thing, is that it's very obvious that this is a problem that video games have right now. And I think that this problem isn't really exclusive to video games. I think that it's true with all types of digital media. And right now we're in a very weird transitionary period where the world at large doesn't know what owning digital media, what the world doesn't know what digital ownership means yet.
I don't think it knows what that means
People think
legally.
that they have the solution with
Yeah.
blockchain. Other people think that they have the solution with just regular licenses, and other people think that they have the solution with physical media. But right now, the idea of what is ownership in the digital age is up for debate. Mm-hmm. And nobody has a definitive answer for this. Now, this is a problem that I think everybody agrees with, but that's it. You have to admit Pirate was misrepresenting. He was.
So this is where you have to admit he's misrepresenting, or he misunderstood, or he didn't do his research. Could just been ignorant.
Undoubtedly, he was misrepresenting it. Pirate Tactic has an initiative based on points Ross never made, then double down on it. That's the issue. Yeah, I think it's fair to criticize that.
I mean, sure.
I agree with that.
Yeah, and I support the initiative.
I don't.
So, I mean, obviously, there's disagreements.
And differences, but obviously, those differences and those disagreements are stated, right? So it's like, that's, yeah, for sure, definitely. I'm more personally concerned about user authentication. There has to be a source of truth for who owns the account. Do they continue to host the user database in the authentication server, or should everybody lose their data? It's not impossible. It's just not super simple. I think that the solution to that would probably be that at the end of service, the data would be transferred to a local account, and then it could be uploaded to a community server. So basically, at end of service, all of that user data is then communicated to the player.
I don't mean to laugh. I'm just like, oh, okay, that's all. We just have to take an existing architecture that we've had to run this, we've got a database, and we just need to figure out how everybody gets their data locally. So we have to build something to do that. And then if we're providing the private server, we have to make it possible for that person to like take that data and put it over there. All of this is possible. That it's possible doesn't mean it is straightforward, trivial, any of these things. Maybe we say, I don't care. They should have to do it. Okay. That means you accept the trade-offs. Then the opportunity cost is they're not doing something else. I think the other things they would be doing are higher value.
Like that in my mind, like, so how would you solve that problem? That would be my first draft of how to do it. Now, maybe that's not the right option.
But like that
probably
would be like,
not,
if you're
because he's
asking
not
me right off
like
the
a
top of my
back-end
head,
server data
like,
guy, and
how would
neither
you
am
solve
I.
it? That would be how I'd solve it.
How is digital ownership up for debate? Wouldn't the logic of physical ownership apply to digital ownership? I think so. No, because digital ownership is oftentimes not ownership, it's licensing, which is what the difference is. It's like Photoshop or something like that.
Yeah, also the difference in decay. So overall, just kind of recap. This was a video of Asmon reacting to Penguin Zero, talking about Ross's response to Thor, to I think 2 different Thor videos. And now I've responded to that whole thing, or reacted to that whole thing. So you got to see that one live. Because I did not watch this one beforehand. I disagree with Penguin Zero and Asmon. I think whether in terms of like supporting versus being not supporting the petition, I'm against the petitions. So in that sense, I'm for what Thor said. Actually, I think he brought up some good points. I think he didn't do a good job of understanding, doing the research around what it was. I think Ross is passionate. I don't think he understands exactly what he's asking with all of this. From the website, from the video he gave, I don't think he's malicious either. I think he's, I think everybody in here is well-intentioned, and we're disagreeing. And that's how it goes sometimes. I do think people aren't as aware of what the cost of this might be. So if I were to leave folks with anything, it's that idea of there's a intention. When you attempt to reach the intention, like this is the intent, what I'm trying to get to, the better state of the future. I create incentives when I attempt to build rules or laws or guidelines to get people so that we have this intention. but I often create more and different incentives than I expected to. And as I do that, I create different impacts than what I wanted to have. I think this, on the surface, looks like a cool thing. If I was just a player out there, I'd be like, yeah, that's right. This makes sense. Maybe. As I dig down a few layers on it, maybe because I'm a game dev, maybe because I like doing systems thinking-y things, it's concerning. I don't trust the laws that would be written or the people that would write them, basically. I worry that we will make things worse, not better, and we will do it in subtle ways. And we will all lose as a result, and that law will never get changed because it was subtle ways in which things got worse. So, there you go. This one has been long. If you watched the whole thing, thank you. So, busy day. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.